John's got a truck here. We're gonna go buy this thing, go over some of the things that you would normally look for in a truck like this before you actually pull the trigger.
This is an 85 F250 6.9 IDI diesel, 4x4, 4-speed manual.
One of the most important things that you can do when you're coming to buy a new truck is to just do the good old-fashioned test drive. Do we try to fire this thing up?
Let's do it.
It's not gonna fire up.
It never fires first. Yeah, it's got its issues, but it does drive really good.
Yeah. When you see a box of fuses inside the interior and
a crescent wrench.
a giant crescent wrench there,
Possibly more tools under the seat.
you gotta wonder why.
Absolutely.
What is up, YouTube? Matt McAdam here, your truck editor at Driving Line, with another episode of Chasing Dust for you guys today. I've got kind of an interesting episode that I put together for you guys. Today, I'm going to be going over some of the tips and tricks that you want to know before you go buy a used truck or 4x4. I have probably purchased upwards of 30 used vehicles in my life, many of them being off-road vehicles. And over the years, I've kind of compiled a short checklist of things to check when I go to look at these vehicles, whether it's a private party sale or if it's something at a dealership. There's always a few things that I look for to make sure that I'm going to be getting a vehicle that's a solid base to build off of and not just something that's going to be causing a ton of problems for me when I go to build it. Obviously, you guys have seen my Toyota. I bought that one used. It had a lot of fabrication work done to it, a lot of different things done with the suspension, the cage, very in-depth build. And there was a lot of things that I looked for in that vehicle before I purchased it. I've got a van that I just picked up. You guys saw that project, my P71 cop car. There's a lot of different things to look for when it comes to these vehicles, but we're gonna go over some of them here in this video today. Now, on today's episode, to help me out with this, I'm gonna have a guest host with me, my buddy Jon Baker. So I'm gonna introduce you guys to Jon here.
How's it going?
Jon? So, Jon, you're obviously no stranger to buying used vehicles.
No, not at all.
You have, I know of probably about a dozen or so, but about how many do you think you've purchased in your lifetime?
100.
100 used cars?
Close to it.
Yeah, I think you're going to be a really good source for, you know, giving our viewers a little bit of insight as to what you look for when you're going to look at a used car, and what I look for when I go to look for a used truck or SUV. And together, I think we can give these guys a pretty good idea of, like, you know, a checklist of things to take a look at before making that purchase.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have a truck or something that we can look at today?
Absolutely.
You do?
I have something perfect right up your alley.
Cool. Let's go see it.
All right, let's go.
Let's go. Oh, dude, you brought Christine?
Yes, sir. My daily.
I love driving this thing.
One of them.
One of the dailies. So for some of us that don't know the history of this car, we got kind of a drive today. Give us a little lesson.
Well, this is the car that was in a Stephen King movie in the 80s. Got a killer possessed demon car that caused a bunch of havoc.
And this isn't obviously the same exact car, but it's the same model. And
the car in the movie was red, and in actuality they never produced a red one from Plymouth.
oh, really?
No.
So that was a custom painted car.
That was a custom painted car.
Yeah.
They were all this tan color,
Yeah.
gold trim, and 318 poly V8.
Where'd you find this thing?
I got this car out of Canada from a 96-year-old man that can no longer drive.
Wow.
And I've been searching for one for a long time. The deal was right, and it's in excellent condition. There's no rust.
Yeah, you drive this
Fairly
thing everywhere.
mechanically sound.
Yeah.
Stops good. It only leaks, quart of oil when you stop. Which is pretty standard for a old car.
imagine the list of things to look for in a car this old as a classic is probably a little bit different from what you'd look for in a truck or an SUV.
I would say that with a truck, an SUV, an off-road vehicle, you gotta focus another 25% of your attention on the suspension, things of that nature.
Yeah, stuff that
Shocks.
you're...
A car like this hasn't been submitted to the same amount of torture that an off-road vehicle is gonna see.
True, true.
So here you're gonna look for powertrain problems, people beating them on the street.
Yeah.
Or an off-road truck's gonna see a lot more bashing and I guess they could call stock mobbing nowadays.
Dude, stock mobbing. You got to be careful what you're looking at these days. Someone could say, "Oh, I've got a bone stock, Ford Explorer or something," but I got some buddies who've done some pretty wild things with bone stock Explorers.
You'd be surprised at how well they would look after.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, so we made it here to the other location, and John's got a truck here that we're gonna use kind of to pretend that we're gonna go buy this thing. He obviously already owns it. We're just gonna pretend like we're buying it, go over some of the things that you would normally look for in a truck like this before you actually pull the trigger and purchase it. All right, dude, so what do we got here?
This is an 85 F250 6.9 IDI diesel.
Yes, it is.
4x4, 4-speed manual, quintessential 80s single cab
80s pickup truck. Yeah, this is like America's pickup truck of the 80s.
Exactly.
Cool.
4-inch Skyjacker lift.
So it's got suspension done to it. It's got some bigger tires. I can see just right off the bat. Being a 6.9 IDI diesel was kind of like the top of the line model back then, or was the 460 more desirable? I don't even know.
It was before my time. So
mine too.
Hard to say, but I would have thought that for industrial use, this would have been the go-to.
Yeah, the heavy hauler.
Yeah, nowadays diesels are kind of the buzzword. Everybody wants one.
Yeah.
So that's where I was going with it.
But it was a cool truck back then. It's still a cool truck and lifted, and it just looks like a classic 80s truck you'd find like in an old movie or something. So whenever I walk up to a vehicle, something like this, the first things you want to look for are the obvious signs of things that you may want to address after you purchase it, or things that may be a little bit too much to deal with. Maybe you don't want to deal with a whole lot of problems, One of the things I noticed is a couple of oil spots underneath the truck. So this thing kind of leaks a little bit of oil, right?
Obviously.
Which is very common for an 80s diesel. Even the 90s and early 2000s diesel trucks, they often have a little oil leak. So it's not really something to be alarmed about, right? I mean,
no.
It wouldn't scare you away from buying a truck.
If it was a puddle, I probably wouldn't want to invest too much in it. But a couple drops, I'm not really going to sweat too much about it.
And a lot of the things that we're going to go over today can be used as like a bargaining chip, right? For some of the things that are wrong. That's what I'm sure you do the same thing. I do that anytime I'm going to buy a vehicle, is find as many things that you can explain that are wrong to the owner so that you can kind of get them down on the price a little bit.
100%.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that this video may help you to do, is identify some of those things so that you can make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. Where should we start? I mean, I usually start with suspension when it comes to trucks and stuff like that, so should we start there?
Absolutely.
Cool. So this thing looks like it's got a lift. One of the things that's really important to look for when you're looking at a suspension system for a truck is to look past the lift height and the way it looks, the stance and everything, and really kind of look deeper into how is it lifted, what kind of kit do they use, because for these trucks and a lot of vehicles, there's many different ways that you can lift them, and some are better than others, right?
Absolutely.
So this truck came originally with a twin traction beam 4-wheel drive system, which is not a solid axle. It's an independent front suspension that looks like a solid axle if you don't know what you're looking at, but I can show you some of the differences when we look underneath it. So as you guys can see, there's a differential up here, and there's 2 beams that actually go out to the tires, and that's how this front 4-wheel drive system works. It's on leaf springs, and it's got a single shock up front. and pretty common setup for an 80s F-Series truck. These are Dana 50 beams because it's an F250, so a little bit bigger, a little bit beefier for the larger truck. And the way this is lifted, you can see these drop brackets right here, and that allows the tires to sit at the correct camber when it's at ride height. So to lift these up, you have to put these drop brackets. They put a longer coil, or if they're on coils, they put a longer coil, or they put a leaf pack on there, and longer shocks, and that pretty much lifts the whole truck up, and it keeps the tires straight up and down and not cambered out. So that's the style lift that's on here. It's not really a bad thing for these trucks. That's kind of how you lifted them back then.
Make sure that they have the corresponding pitman arm to keep your steering angle.
That's a really good point. Yeah, the pitman arm coming from the steering box, if the angle is at the factory angle pitman arm, then you're going to have a drag link that's not in line with your track bar, and that can cause a lot of issues with drivability going down the road. They kind of just walk all over the place when you don't have it right. So
that's why it's back down here, is for a little bit of maintenance.
Oh, okay.
Being in the desert so long.
So some of the things that you'd look for is like worn out components from the lift kit, stuff that you would have to change out.
Things that are worn out or possibly loosening up from abuse, or broken from abuse, waiting to fail.
Linkages, ball joints, things of that nature, steering joints. So
brake hoses near any of those.
Yep. There's
anything that could be interfering or rubbing.
Chafing on a brake hose or something.
Could lead to a big problem down the road.
Yeah, especially if you're planning on driving this thing home or something like that. So let's take a look at the back. The rear suspension is probably, I'm going to guess, it's a block.
No, these are lift.
Did it have a leaf spring in there?
Leaf spring. And then I kept the stock block in there.
No, that's actually really nice. So that's a bonus, because you don't see a lot of lifted leaf sprung trucks that actually have a leaf pack under them. This rear end, I believe, is a Dana 60. Could be wrong. Maybe it's a Sterling 10 1/4. Is it?
Yeah, it's a Dana 70.
Okay.
And best of my knowledge, they don't make squat for them. So if you're looking to upgrade this in the future,
you're out of luck.
You are out of luck.
So that's another important thing, is to do your research before you buy a vehicle, to make sure that you can do the things that you want to do to them. But that's nice that it's got lift leaf springs and not just a block. One of the things that you don't want to be fooled by is the brand of shock that's on a truck. Just because you go up to a used truck and it's got Fox shocks on it or King shocks, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best shock that you can get for the vehicle. A lot of times people will buy brand name shocks because, well, they're a brand name, without really knowing the correct collapsed and extended length of the shock, and it's not right for the lift height. That's a problem I've ran into on several vehicles that I went to go buy. Somebody put a shock that's far too long in a vehicle for the amount of travel and lift that it's got, and what you'll find is you'll bottom out that shock much easier, and you can also overextend some of your suspension because the shock is so long. So those are some things to keep in mind. Don't just look at the brand names, but actually know that the size and the application is correct for which it's on. Before we go on, looking at some of the more exterior items, wheels and tires are pretty important when you're going to buy a truck, right? Depending on how much money you want to invest in a vehicle, if it's got good wheels and tires, you can save quite a bit of coin. Because later on, buying a set of 35s or 37s is not cheap.
I believe this was about $1,000 in tires.
Yeah.
When I did it.
And maybe the wheel choice is not your style. You want to change the wheels up. So you got to keep that into consideration, so that if you're going to go buy wheels and tires, you're going to drop $2,000 just on that stuff.
Another thing that may be noted is work on your strength.
Yeah.
If you're a paint guy, go buy one with a poor paint job. If you're an electrical guy, buy one that's got an electrical gremlin.
Yeah.
If you're a suspension guy, buy one that's got some issues there. With this one, I saw a truck that relatively priced, It had a fresh paint job, fresh interior, and fresh Line-X in the bed.
Okay.
That's stuff I didn't want to deal with.
Right.
The suspension and everything else was easy for me.
Yeah. But the bodywork you didn't want to touch.
Didn't want to touch it.
Yeah.
Not my thing.
So, yeah, that's a good point, is to play off of your strengths and see what on the vehicle is something that you're willing to tackle and what you're willing to take on versus what you'd have to sub out to somebody to pay them to do it. And a lot of times you can save yourself a lot of hassle and a lot of money. Should we try to fire this thing up?
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. I always recommend that the person that doesn't try to fire the truck up before I head over to look at it, I like to have a cold vehicle before I go look at it. So it's not going to fire up.
Never fires first.
Good old IDI. Sounds like America.
Yeah. Or a bunch of metal in a metal box slanging around. When you go to buy a truck, probably better to see it actually do that than the next morning after you bought it, realize that's what you have to do every time you start it.
Moral of that story is try to get it cold. Try to get to it while it's still cold and not warmed up, because you never know what might happen when you get it fired up while it's cold.
Better yet, try and catch the seller off guard.
Yeah.
Show up before they can warm it up, because it'll always start easier once it's warm.
Right. Now this has got a turbo on it,
Yeah.
so that's not a factory.
No.
Yeah, the bank sidewinder turbo was something you could add on. It was a really popular mod, I think, for these trucks.
Yeah, it's kind of necessary nowadays to keep up with traffic.
So I asked John to shut it off just so we can speak over the the sound of this thing a little bit easier. But typically, I would run a vehicle to a full heat cycle before shutting it off, just to make sure that you don't have any coolant leaks and you don't have any issues that may arise once the truck is warmed up. But if you're really going to go and be serious about looking at a vehicle, you should drive it anyway, and that will tell you a lot that you need to know once it's actually ran through a heat cycle. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going to cut her off a little early and talk a little bit about what's going on under here. So like we were mentioning, it's got a bank sidewinder turbo kit, which is a really popular mod that these trucks had back in the day, because without them, the 6.9 IDI was just a dog, man.
Awful.
Yeah, I mean they were torquey as hell. You know, you could pull anything with them, but you're not going to win any races.
No.
It's just you have a hard time just getting up to speed on the highway, right? Like merging into traffic.
Before I put the turbo on, it was pretty. It's like driving a car around from the 50s.
Yeah, not a practical vehicle to drive.
No.
Yeah, I mean they may do pretty good off-road, but that's really going to be the extent of it. So first thing that comes to my mind, and one of the things that I always look for, is the wiring on a vehicle.
Yes.
So a lot of aftermarket parts, whether it's light bars or winches or things like that, they require wiring to get them to work, and oftentimes that's one of the areas that an owner will skimp out on when it comes to the installation. They kind of just throw it together because they're so excited about getting this accessory to work that they don't really pay attention to how they do the wiring, and what may start as a temporary solution to a wiring installation becomes a permanent fix.
It's important to understand that the wiring electrical system in your car is the nervous system.
Yeah.
So if you have a short or a wire rubbing on a moving part, or a wire that's been cut altogether, it could affect 2, 3, multiple things.
Other systems, yeah.
And it might sneak up on you and act up right when you don't need it to.
Right. And there's some really, really weird things out there that can happen. I mean, I never thought that I would be dealing with a problem with my transmission on my old Ford diesel, but then I found out that the third brake light bulb, when it goes out, it doesn't let the truck shift into overdrive. it actually keeps the torque converter unlocked all the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was one of those engineering solutions that Ford came up with in the 80s and 90s, where they thought, okay, well, if the person's going to be on the brakes and the light is on, third brake light, we don't want the truck to be locked up, the torque converter to be locked up. They'd unlock it. When it detects that there's no bulb and there's no circuit being completed there and the bulb is out or something, then the truck doesn't want to shift into overdrive and it doesn't lock the torque converter up. And it will drive you nuts trying to fix your transmission when all it was a third brake light bulb that you just had to switch out.
Wow.
So that's just one
You learn
example.
something every day.
Yeah, that's just one example of like these quirks that a lot of people don't know about when it comes to like some of these trucks and the wiring things that cause other systems that you normally would think would be completely irrelevant to go bad. Doing your research on vehicles is very important when it comes to effectively knowing what you're looking at when you come to buy a vehicle on Craigslist or Facebook or OfferUp or whatever it is. Back to this wiring. So there's a lot of old trucks that have wiring that kind of looks like this. It's just not really loomed up or tucked away. But a sure telltale sign that this is an aftermarket wiring job is these butt connectors like this. This kind of thing you typically wouldn't see from Ford exposed like that without shrink wrap.
Moreover, I'd say that when you see a butt connector or spade connectors or, you know,
vampire bites,
you know, even if the wiring looks considerably newer from here to there, that should raise some red flags right away.
Yeah, because that means that the person who did it didn't really take the time to loom anything up. I mean, you can see this whole harness here. I don't even know what this goes to, but there's just a ton of
Let's go in the truck
wires here.
and I'll show you.
You know where it all goes to?
I know exactly why that had to be repaired.
Okay. Oh, the interior is rather nice in this thing.
That was one of the selling features of this.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I can see a whole mess of wires down there.
You can see that at some point the fuse box broke loose of wherever it was supposed to mount. You can see this is just wiggling. And if you look up farther, you know, the floor, the jute backing's falling apart. But here's just a bunch of wires sitting there. There's really no way to hold them in place. The clutch pedal shorted the wires out. It rubbed, it chafed the rubber outside of the wire off, shorted against the steel clutch pedal, and caused the wiring issue under the hood.
To short and it just burned it up. So, like you were saying, moving parts causing wires to chafe and things like that caused somebody to have to go in and rewire this whole thing, pretty much, right? I mean, these 6.9s didn't run on a lot of electronics.
No.
Almost like a carbureted motor.
There's one wire to a 6.9 that lets your fuel on. Lucky for me, I'm not afraid of wiring at all. It comes naturally. So this was a great item for me to get a good deal on the truck and fix it myself. It might not be the best fix, but for what we use the truck for, it worked out perfect.
It made it work, yeah, exactly. But nonetheless, stuff to look for when you're out looking at a truck.
Definitely.
Yeah. Another thing that I like to look for when it comes to a diesel truck is the blow-by. When you have a motor that's got a lot of miles on it or a lot of hard use, the piston rings tend to start going out on it where they let some of that compression into the crankcase. And one really simple test that you can do on a lot of diesel trucks is to pop the oil filler cap off of the valve cover or wherever it may be, and simply set it upside down on top of the hole, the exposed hole. And if you see that cap start to bounce up and down, that's kind of what they call the blow-by test. Then you know that the vehicle's got a lot of blow-by. Excessive blow-by is something that's a key indicator of a motor that's going to need to be re-ringed pretty soon, because you got a lot of that compression from the cylinder, from the compression stroke of the cylinder leaking into the crankcase and then forcing its way out of the only open exit, which happens to be that open oil cap. So blow-by is something to check for. A lot of 7.3 diesel guys will tell you that that's the easiest way to check for a healthy 7.3. I don't think the 6.9s had a huge issue with that, so that we're not going to take a look at it on this motor, but something to keep in mind either way. John, do you have any tips for what to look for on a motor when you're going to look at a car or a truck?
Lots of stuff to look for on a motor. Excessive oil leaks. You know, again, going back on working on your strength, if it's got an oil leak out of the rear main, that's a hassle.
Yeah.
If it's got an oil leak from a valve cover, that's not so bad.
Right.
Some things to look for. Again, going back on what you said about the oil cap breather test, the more compression that's bleeding past the rings and going into the crankcase, all that pressure is going to put a test on all the seals. And if you see excessive oil leaking, that could be a sign of the motor worn out.
That's a good point. Yeah.
In this case, it is absolutely worn out.
And that's what little spots underneath it are from?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, so take a look and make sure that that you don't have a ton of oil coming out of places, because that could mean that the rings are going bad and putting a lot of pressure on all the areas of the motor that are sealed up with some kind of a gasket or something like that.
It also could be a bad PCV valve, which is sometimes just a $10 part. People spend hours beating their head against the wall thinking, oh, this seal needs to be replaced and that seal needs to be replaced. And in actuality, it's just a check valve.
Yeah.
And you let that pressure out and all the seals are fine.
Good to go. Yeah. One of the things I like to do personally is to check to make sure that you don't have a blown head gasket or some kind of a oil and coolant mixture going on. And a really easy way to do that, if you guys don't know, this is a simple test that many people will tell you to check for, is to pull the dipstick of a vehicle to make sure that the oil is indeed like a deep brown color or a dark black. If it's a diesel, sometimes you'll see it be black. If you see any kind of a light, kind of a mocha color or a chocolate milk kind of color, then that's a pretty clear indicator that there is a mixture of water in your oil. Taking a look at this one here, that looks like a pretty dark black color, and that's normal for a diesel truck. So I'd say that we don't have any issues here with coolant mixture in the oil. But yeah, there's people will try all kinds of things to cover up a blown head gasket. You know, that stop leak stuff, or head gasket fix, the blue stuff you pour in your crankcase.
It wrecks your radiator. It fills up your coolant galleys.
Yeah. It just makes a huge mess of the motor, and oftentimes they don't work at all. So you're going to end up having to replace that gasket and then cleaning up everything inside the motor just to get rid of that stuff they put in there. Another thing that I like to look at when you're buying a vehicle with an automatic transmission, this truck happens to be a manual, but is to run the vehicle and just have it in park and idling, and come out to the front. There's oftentimes a dipstick for the automatic trans. And what I like to do is I like to pull that dipstick while it's running to first check the level, make sure that the level is correct. And while I'm doing that, I'll actually take that dipstick and just kind of bring it up to my base and kind of just get a whiff of it and just smell that oil. And it's pretty easy to determine if a transmission's been burnt up or if it's been ran overheated, because that oil will start to smell burnt. It smells like a very distinctive burning oil smell. So that's one thing that I like to check when I'm looking at an automatic transmission. This one again happens to be a manual, so we can't do it, but just something to keep in mind. But of course, one of the most important things that you can do when you're coming to buy a new truck or an old truck or a used truck or whatever it is to just do the good old-fashioned test drive. Get in the thing, get behind the wheel, and just go drive it around and see what you can decipher from driving it. When you see a box of fuses inside the interior and
a crescent wrench,
a giant crescent wrench there,
possibly more tools under the seat,
you got to wonder why.
Absolutely. Ready to rip?
Yeah, let's do it. So if you got a manual, make sure the clutch is engaging nicely. One thing you want to check for, obviously see the gears are shifting smooth. Some of the things you want to pay attention to, other than the normal stuff like checking the air conditioning and the radio and the windshield wipers and headlights while you're behind the wheel of the truck, is just listen for sounds. I mean, that's one of the most important things you can do, is use your ears to tell you what may be going wrong. You know, there's a lot of driveline issues that will cause ticks and knocking noises or creaks that you might hear from the suspension that may indicate a ball joint or a bushing that may need to be replaced. So some of those things you'll hear, you know, can indicate things you may need to fix later on.
Yeah, it's got its issues, but it does drive really good.
Yeah. absolutely, if you're buying or if you're looking at a four-wheel drive vehicle, one thing you want to do is test that four-wheel drive system out, make sure that it shifts smoothly. So we're going to come to a stop here on a straight road here in the residential area, and I'm going to have John kind of demonstrate how to put a vehicle into four-wheel drive and make sure that the transfer case is shifting smoothly and correctly, and that the gears aren't blown up on the inside of it, so that it is indeed transferring power to the front tires, so you can make sure that that is all working right. So you want to go ahead and give us a quick demonstration?
You want 4 low or 4 high?
We'll put it in 4 high first.
Alright, here's one.
Shift it into 4 high. Truck's taking off fine, no weird noises. It's good. So going into 4 low, you just basically come to a stop. You want to come to a complete stop, and then you want to put the transmission in neutral, shift down into 4 low with the transfer case, and then you put in first gear. You should feel immediately a much luggier, high RPM, low speed driving style. And you can see that right there. For you to really be able to test, it sounds like your hubs are locked.
They are.
Yeah. If the hubs are indeed locked, or if you don't have manual locking hubs, a lot of times the front tires will be engaged. When you're on pavement, it's not a good idea to turn when you're in four-wheel drive, because you can do damage to the drivetrain. You don't want to damage someone's car you haven't bought yet. So if you have four-wheel drive hubs, make sure you lock them and unlock them in the front. Make sure that they are working correctly, because sometimes replacing those isn't very easy or cheap to do. So looks like the four-wheel drive is working really nice in this thing. Let's guide her back home into the driveway. Well, there you guys have it. We kind of went through all of the things that you want to look for when you're buying a used four-wheel drive or a used truck. John, this truck was kind of the perfect specimen for this video, because it had a little bit of everything. Had some problems with the electrical, had an oil leak, had suspension parts that were modified, bigger wheels and tires, all the things that you want to look for and check before you purchase a vehicle. So it was a pretty good choice of a truck there to use.
Glad I have it for you.
Yeah. If you guys have any questions on specific items, maybe some things I didn't go over that you may be curious about, please drop them in the comments below. I love answering these questions for you guys, and I'd be happy to see if I can help you out if you're going to be buying a vehicle, and some of the things to look for on specific models that are different from others. So there's a lot of wealth of information online about this stuff, but when it comes down to it, a lot of trucks are the same, and there's a lot of common things that you want to look for, like the stuff we went over today. Thank you guys for coming along with me today on this episode of Chasing Dust. Once again, I'm your truck editor at Driving Line, Matt McAdam, aka Desert Chief. I'll see you guys on the next one.